Alright folks, it is week number 8, and we are reading chapter 6, The Director. You get to think like a director this week. This is a role that I know pretty well. I've directed quite a few shows in my time, in my 44 years, but the role of the director has shifted and changed over the course of history. So we're going to do a quick little mini lecture here about kind of the beginning of Western direction, or the non-direction. So the Greeks, normally the director or whoever was in charge was either the playwright, who was also an actor. In fact, most of the sort of lead in what we understand would be a director's role would have come out of either the playwright or the acting pool, to kind of have an idea of saying who goes where and when. Most of staging is a relatively new concept. The actor was in charge a lot of the time, unless a choreographer or someone teaching a dance would be engaged in the production. Actors would have a lot more agency in how they were staged and would have been trained or went through an apprenticeship to understand how to move within a group setting. Improv, like Commedia dell'arte and things like that, those things weren't set, but they would have what they would call lazzi, where there's a tradition or something truly written down, if actors could read. And strangely enough, actors would have a little bit of education if they weren't learning orally. That's for the next chapter when we talk about acting. Up until the 1700s, the 18th century, directions were coming from the playwright or from an actor-manager, a prompt playmaster. And a lot of times it was just the person who was kind of holding on to the troupe's information, that they were holding on to the written scripts, or they were in charge of making sure that all the props and things were involved, and so they were in charge of handing them out. And so we really didn't see a modern director until we started seeing more elements, and particularly sort of sitting down, that troupes would have a home theater, that they weren't traveling around, because remember, actors were sort of the lowest of the low, and particularly during plague times were traveling wherever they could, so they were pretty mobile. So once we see acting troupes starting to have permanent homes, then there became stage elements like lighting, like sets, like props, and then there needed to be someone sort of marshalling, being an outside eye. So the emergence of the modern director would have come around the time of the late 1700s into the early 1800s, and really came to its height in the mid 1800s. We're going to watch two videos about Gilbert and Sullivan. I mentioned them last week, and it just so happens that the book mentioned them again, so I thought I'd show you two clips from a movie called Topsy-Turvy that is a really fabulous movie, a biopic about Gilbert and Sullivan and the making of what is now a pretty controversial show called The Mikado, which was during the mid to late 1800s. Japan was opening up to the Western world, a lot for trade, but also the British Empire was trying to gain a foothold into the far eastern realms of Asia. And so there was this flood of information, and G.S. Gilbert got real excited about what they would entitle Oriental culture. Of course, that term maybe rankles us a little bit here in America. At the time, that's what Gilbert was writing about, and it is prime colonialism. But why we're watching the clip is that Gilbert was one of the first sort of movers in the opera world to sort of have an iron fist over how things were staged. He was the lyricist and the playwright, and held on really closely to how things were staged. And so we're going to watch those videos right now. This sort of dictatorial and one might say very patriarchy sort of directorial style was sort of the norm through the middle 1800s all the way through till the late 20th century. And we'll see how it's sort of morphed and changed after Gilbert, but let's take a look at that right now.